WorldComEDU. Elite Children's Classics.
The Short Stories of O. Henry. Part 1. After 20 years. It was nearly 10 p.m. on a chilly night, and the street was almost empty. Only a policeman moved slowly up the dark avenue, twirling his nightstick and humming to himself. Halfway up one block, he suddenly slowed his walk. A man was standing in a dark doorway with an unlighted cigar in his mouth. The man spoke quickly. "It's all right, officer," he said. "I made an appointment 20 years ago to meet a friend right here where Big Joe Brady's restaurant used to be." "It was torn down 5 years ago," said the policeman. The man struck a match and lit his cigar. The light showed his pale face with sharp eyes and a white scar near his eyebrow. He was wearing a large diamond tie pin. Then he continued, "I had dinner here at Big Joe Brady's 20 years ago with my best pal, Jimmy Wells. We grew up just like brothers. I was 18 and he was 20, and I was leaving next morning for the West to make my fortune. Jimmy loved New York too much to leave it. We agreed to meet here 20 years later at the same day and time." "Sounds interesting," said the policeman. "It's been a long time between meetings, though. Have you ever heard from your friend?" "We corresponded for a while," said the man. "But the West is pretty big, and I've been traveling over it all the time. Jimmy will meet me, I'm sure. He's the truest friend in the world. I came 1,000 miles, but if my old partner shows up, it will be worth it." He pulled out a handsome watch covered with diamonds and announced, 3 minutes to 10. It was exactly 10 o'clock when we parted. When he saw the watch, the policeman said, "It looks as if you did pretty well out west." "I sure did. I hope Jimmy has done half as well. He was a good guy, but a little slow. I had to use my brains to get my money. A man gets in a rut in New York, but out west, you have to be sharp." The policeman twirled his club, and as he started to walk away, he said, "Well, I hope your friend arrives exactly on time." "Oh, I'll wait at least half an hour. If Jimmy is alive, he'll be here by then. So long, officer," said the other. Now, a light rain was falling, and the wind was blowing hard. In the doorway, the man who had come 1,000 miles smoked his cigar and waited. About 20 minutes later, a tall man in a long overcoat hurried across the street. His collar was up to his ears because of the cold. As he went towards the waiting man, he called, "Is that you, Bob?" "Jimmy Wells?" cried the man in the doorway. The new arrival grasped the other's hands. "It is Bob. I was sure I'd find you here. Well, well, well. 20 years is a long time. How has the West treated you, old friend? Great! I've done real well. But you've changed, Jimmy. You're 2 or 3 inches taller than when I last saw you. Yes, I grew a little after I was 20. Are you doing well in New York, Jimmy? Pretty well. I work for the city. Come on, Bob. We'll go someplace for a long talk. The 2 men walked arm in arm. Bob started bragging about his great success in the West. The other listened with interest. At the street corner, a bright light shone from an all-night drugstore window. The 2 men turned and looked into each other's face. The man from the West was shocked. "You're not Jimmy Wells," he said. 20 years is a long time, but it isn't long enough to change a man's nose from Roman to pug. 20 years sometimes changes a good man into a bad one, replied the tall man. You've been under arrest for the past 10 minutes, Silky Bob. Chicago telegraphed us that you might come to town. Now, before we go to the police station, here's a note from Police Officer Wells. The man from the West unfolded the paper and read it by the light of the window. The note was short, and the man was trembling when he finished reading it. It said, I was at the doorway on time. When you struck the match, I saw it was the face of the man wanted by the police in Chicago. I couldn't do it myself, so I got a plainclothes detective to do the job. Jimmy. Mammon and the Archer. Old Anthony Rockwall had made his fortune by manufacturing Eureka soap. He was now comfortably retired and living in a magnificent 15-room house on New York's Fifth Avenue. The old, aristocratic families who lived on either side of him in equally handsome mansions were not happy about their new neighbor. They snubbed him whenever possible. Anthony Rockwall never used bells, so he shouted for his manservant. Mike, tell my son to come here before he leaves. When young Rockwall entered, his father put down the newspaper and smiled a rough, loving smile. Richard, he said, some people think it takes 3 generations to make a gentleman, but they're wrong. Money will do it. It's made a gentleman of you, and it's almost made one of me. I'm nearly as impolite and disagreeable as those 2 old men next door who can't sleep because I bought the house between them. There are some things money can't do, said young Rockwall gloomily. Don't say that, said old Anthony, shocked. Tell me something money won't buy. It won't buy a person into high society, answered Richard. Oh ho, won't it? Thundered Anthony. When Richard sighed, he continued. That's why I asked you to come in. Something's wrong with you, boy. I've been noticing it. Do you need money? If you do, I can get you 11 million by tomorrow. If it's your liver, our yacht's ready right now to take you to the Bahamas for a rest. You're right, Dad. There is something wrong. But it's nothing like that. Aha, said old Anthony. What's her name? Richard walked up and down the room. His father was sympathetic. Why don't you ask her? He demanded. You've got money, good looks, and you've been to college. I haven't got a chance, sighed Richard. Make one. Take her for a walk in the park, or to church, or go on a hayride. You don't understand, Dad. She's part of the high society. She's kept busy every hour of the day. Do you mean with all our money, you can't get an hour or two with that girl? Roared the old man. It's too late. Day after tomorrow, she's going to sail to Europe and stay for 2 years. Right now, she's visiting her aunt in Larchmont. I can't go there to see her. But they said I can meet her at Grand Central Station tomorrow night. I'll take her to meet her mother at the theater. It's only a 6 or 8 minute cab ride down Broadway. Do you think she'll listen to me in that little time? No, Dad. You can't buy minutes with cash. All right, Richard, said old Anthony cheerfully. Run along to your club now. I'm glad it ain't your liver. That night, gentle, wrinkled Aunt Ellen came into her brother Anthony's room to talk about the lovers' problems. I know. He's already told me, said her brother, yawning. I offered him money, but he said it couldn't help. Oh, Anthony, sighed Aunt Helen. I wish you wouldn't always think of money. Love is what is all-powerful. All your gold cannot bring happiness to your son. The next evening, Aunt Helen took an old-fashioned gold ring from its case and gave it to Richard. Wear it tonight, nephew, she said. Your mother asked me to give it to you when you found your true love. Richard took it carefully. It was too small for his fingers, so he put it in his vest pocket. At exactly 8:32, he met Miss Lantry at the station. She didn't want to keep her mama waiting, so Richard told the cab driver, Drive to the Wallack's Theater as fast as you can. They galloped up 42nd Street to Broadway. At 34th Street, Richard suddenly asked the cabman to stop his horse. I've dropped my mother's ring, and I'd hate to lose it. I saw where it fell. In less than a minute, he was back with the ring. But in that short time, a streetcar had stopped in front of the cab. The driver tried to pass, but a wagon was in the way. A furniture van was blocking the road on the other side. The cab driver started to shout and swear at the tangle of vehicles and horses. Oh dear, we'll be late, said Miss Lantry impatiently. When Richard stood up in the cab, it looked like the entire traffic of New York had jammed itself together. Old-time New Yorkers shook their heads and said they had never seen anything like it. I'm very sorry, said Richard when he sat back down. But we're stuck. It's all my fault. If I hadn't dropped the ring, Never mind, said Miss Lantry. I don't really care if we're late. May I see the ring? At 11 o'clock that night, Aunt Ellen, looking like a gray-haired angel that had been left on Earth by mistake, tapped on old Anthony's door. "Come in," shouted Anthony. He was wearing a red bathrobe and reading a book about pirates. "They're engaged, Anthony," she said softly. "There was a terrible street blockade, and it was 2 hours before their cab could get out of it. And oh, Brother Anthony, don't even talk about the power of money again. It was the little gold ring, symbolizing love, that did it. He dropped the ring, and when he got out to find it, their cab was trapped in a traffic jam. He spoke of love and won her. Money is nothing compared to true love, Anthony." "Well," said old Anthony, "I'm glad the boy got what he wanted. I told him I wouldn't mind spending money too." "But, brother," interrupted the lady, "what good could your money have done?" Then she left, and old Anthony went back to his pirate story. Next day, a person with rough hands and a blue polka dot necktie visited the Rockwall house. "Well, Kelly," said Anthony, "it was a good job. I gave you $5,000. Was it enough?" "I paid $300 of my own," said Kelly. "The cabs and wagons were mostly $5, but the trucks and horse teams were $10. The cops were the highest, $50 for 2, and the others $20 and $25. But didn't it work grand, Mr. Rockwall?" Anthony tore off a check. "Here's your 1,000, plus the $300 you spent extra, Kelly. You don't hate money, do you?" "Who, me?" laughed Kelly. "No, sir, not me." As Kelly started for the door, Anthony asked, "Say, Kelly, last night you didn't notice a little fat boy with no clothes on shooting arrows at my son and his girl, did you?" "No," said Kelly, shaking his head in a puzzled way. "But maybe the cops arrested him before I got there." "I didn't think he'd be there," smiled Anthony. "Goodbye, Kelly, and thanks." The Ransom of Red Chief. Bill Driscoll and I were in Alabama, and we had $600 between us. We needed $2,000 for a tricky deal we wanted to try in Illinois. While stopping in a little town called Summit, we got the kidnapping idea. This was the kind of place where families were close. Also, there was only a sheriff and a few lazy bloodhounds. It looked good. We selected the only child of a rich man named Ebenezer Dorset. This boy was 10 years old, with a freckled face and bright red hair. Bill and I figured we could get $2,000 from Ebenezer easily. But wait till I tell you. About 2 miles from Summit was a little mountain covered with trees, and we stored our food and bedding in a cave near the top. One evening, we rented a horse and buggy and drove past old Dorset's house. The kid was in the street, throwing rocks at a kitten. "Hey, little boy," says Bill, "would you like to take a ride?" Wham! A rock hit Bill right in the eye. "That will cost his old man an extra $500, says Bill. The boy fought like an angry bear, but finally we caught him and drove away. We took him to the cave, and I returned the buggy to a village 3 miles away. Then I walked back up the mountain. There was a good fire burning, and the boy was watching over a pot of coffee. He had 2 buzzard feathers stuck in his red hair. He pointed a stick at me and said,
"Beware, paleface! You are entering the camp of Red Chief the Terrible!"
"We're playing Indian," says Bill. "I'm old Hank, Red Chief's captive. I'm to be scalped at sunrise. Boy, can that kid kick!" He rolled up his trousers and rubbed his bruised legs. Yes, sir, the fun of camping in a cave made the kid forget that he was the captive. He named me Snake Eye, the spy, and said I was to be burned at the stake at sunrise. At supper, with his mouth full of bread and gravy, he began to talk.
"I like this fine. I never camped out before, but I had a pet rabbit once. I was 9 last birthday. I hate school. Why is your nose so red, Hank? My father has lots of money. Are stars hot? I don't like girls. Amos Murray has 6 toes."
Then he gave a loud war whoop that made all Hank and me jump. That boy already had Hank terrorized. "Red Chief," says I, "would you like to go home?"
"Aw, what for?"
says he.
"I don't have any fun at home. I like to camp out. You won't take me back home again, Snake Eye, will you?"
"No," says I. "We'll stay here a while."
"All right,"
says he.
"That's great. I never had so much fun."
We went to bed at 11 p.m., putting Red Chief on a blanket between us. He kept us awake for 3 hours screeching,
"Sst! Listen!"
and rushing to the cave entrance. I finally fell into a troubled sleep and dreamed I had been tied to a tree by a red-haired pirate. At daybreak, I was awakened with the most awful screams from Bill. They weren't manly yells. They were hysterical screams like women emit when they see ghosts or caterpillars. It's terrible to hear a fat man screaming in a cave at dawn. Red Chief was sitting on Bill's chest with one hand grabbing Bill's hair. In his other hand, he held our bacon slicing knife. He was trying to scalp Bill, just as he said he would the night before. I took the knife away from the kid and made him lie down again. From the moment on, Bill never closed his eyes while the boy was with us. I started to go back to sleep, but then I remembered that Red Chief had said that I was to be burned at sunrise. I decided to sit up and smoke my pipe. "Why are you up, Sam?" asked Bill. "Me?" says I. "Oh, I got a pain in my shoulder."
"You are a liar!"
shouts Bill.
"You're afraid he'll burn you at sunrise. And he will, too, if he can find a match. Ain't it awful, Sam? Do you think anyone will pay to get that little monster back home?"
Sure, says I. That's the kind of kid parents are proud of. Now, you two cook breakfast while I go up the mountain and look around. When I looked down at Summit, I expected to see all the villagers searching for the kidnappers. Instead, everything was peaceful. So, I went back down for breakfast. In the cave, Bill was backed against the wall, and the boy was threatening to smash him with a rock as big as a coconut.
He put a red-hot tomato down my back,
wailed Bill.
So I smacked him. Have you got a gun I could carry, Sam?
I took the rock away from the boy.
I'll fix you,
says the kid to Bill.
No man ever hit his Red Chief without paying for it.
After breakfast, the kid went outside. Bill was worried.
What's he doing now? Do you think maybe he'll run away?
He says hopefully. No, he don't seem much of a homebody. I think we should send a note to his father demanding $2,000 as soon as possible. Just then, we heard a loud war whoop, and an egg-sized rock flew from Red Chief's slingshot.
Woo!
I ducked, but it hit Bill behind his left ear, and he fell into the fire. I dragged him out and poured cold water over his head for half an hour. Finally, Bill sits up.
Sam, do you know King Herod is my favorite Bible character? He ordered all boy babies to be killed.
I caught the boy and shook him until his freckles rattled. Are you going to be good? Says I. If not, I'll take you straight home.
Aw, I didn't mean to hurt old Hank,
he pouted.
But why did he have to hit me? I'll be good if you won't send me home. Can I play Black Scout today?
I have to go someplace on business. Now, you go in and tell Bill you're sorry for hurting him, or home you'll go. I made them shake hands. Then I told Bill secretly that I would go to a nearby town and try to find out what was happening in Summit.
You know, Sam,
says Bill,
I've been with you through earthquakes, police raids, and train robberies. I've never lost my nerve till we kidnapped that two-legged skyrocket. You won't leave me with him very long, will you, Sam?
I promised to be back by afternoon. Then we wrote a letter to Old Dorset, while Red Chief, with a blanket wrapped round him, strutted up and down, guarding the cave. Bill begged me to make the ransom for $1,500 instead of $2,000.
It ain't human to ask anybody to pay $2,000 for that 40-pound freckled wildcat.
To make Bill happy, I agreed. We wrote Ebenezer Dorset that we had his boy. We demanded $1,500 and told him where to leave the money. We said that if he paid the money, we would return his boy safe in 3 hours. We signed it, 2 desperate men. I put the letter in my pocket. Before I left, Red Chief says,
I'm tired of playing Indian. You said I could play Black Scout.
All right, says I. Ask Mr. Bill.
What do I have to do?
Asked Bill, looking at Red Chief suspiciously.
"You're to be my horse,"
says Black Scout.
"Get down on your hands and knees so I can ride you."
Bill got down and looked like a rabbit caught in a trap.
"We got to ride 90 miles today, and you gotta move fast."
Then Black Scout jumps on Bill's back and kicks him in the side.
"Sam,"
pleads Bill.
"hurry back. I wish we had only asked $1,000. You quit kicking me, kid, or I'll warm your bottom."
I walked to Poplar Grove and sat in the post office chatting. When I heard how all of Summit was upset about Ebenezer Dorset's missing boy, I mailed my letter and walked away. When I got back to the cave, Bill and the boy were not there. I sat down to wait and smoked my pipe. Half an hour later, I saw Bill staggering up the hill. He wiped his face with a red handkerchief.
"Sam,"
says Bill,
"you're going to be angry, but I couldn't help it. The boy is gone. I just couldn't stand it anymore."
"What happened, Bill?" I asked him.
"He rode me 90 miles to the fort. Then he fed me oats, only they were sand. After that, he asked me 100 dumb questions. Finally, I drags him down the mountain. He kicked my legs black and blue, and I have 3 awful bites on my hand. But he's gone," continued Bill. "Gone home. I showed him the road to Summit, and I gave him one big kick that sent him 8 feet on his way. I'm sorry about the ransom, but he was driving me to the crazy house."
Bill was puffing, but his pink face was peaceful. "Bill," says I, "is there any heart disease in your family?"
"No,"
says Bill.
"Why?"
"Well, just have a look behind you." Bill turned around and saw the boy grinning. Bill turns white and sinks to the ground. For a while I was worried about his mind. But then I told him my plan. We'd get the ransom and be gone by midnight. Bill sat up with a weak smile. At 8:30, I hid up in a tree, so if any police were coming, I could see them. Exactly on time, a half-grown boy rides up the road on a bicycle. He puts a piece of paper in our box by the tree and then rides off. I slid down the tree and took the note back to the cave, where I read it to Bill. "Gentlemen, I received your letter. Your ransom demand is much too high. I have an offer for you which I'm sure you'll accept. If you bring Johnny home and pay me $250 in cash, I will take him back. Come at night. The neighbors were happy that Johnny was gone, and I don't know what they might do to anybody who brought him back. Yours truly, Ebenezer Dorset." I exclaimed angrily, but then I saw the look on Bill's face.
"Sam,"
says he,
$250 ain't much. We've got the money. One night more with that kid will drive me completely crazy."
"To tell the truth, Bill," says I, "this little brat has gotten on my nerves too. We'll accept the offer." That night, we told the boy his father had bought a silver-handled rifle for him, and we would all hunt bears the next day. At midnight, we knocked at Ebenezer's front door. At that very moment, when we should have been receiving $1,500 from old Dorset. Bill was counting out $250 into his hand. When the kid realized we were leaving, he howled and wrapped himself around Bill's leg like a leech. His father had to peel him off.
How long can you hold him?
Asks Bill.
I'm not very strong, says Dorset, but I can promise you 10 minutes. That's enough, says Bill. In 10 minutes, I'll be across half the United States and heading for Canada.
It was dark. Bill was fat, and I was a good runner. But he was a mile and a half out of Summit before I could catch up with him. The Short Stories of O. Henry. A Retrieved Reformation. Jimmy Valentine was working in the prison shoe shop when the guard escorted him to the warden's office. There, he received a pardon from the governor, thanks to his influential friends. A $5 bill, some bad-fitting clothes, and some advice.
Now, Valentine, said the warden, stop cracking safes and live straight. You're not a bad fellow.
Me? Said Jimmy innocently. Why, I never cracked a safe in my life. The warden laughed and gave him a cigar. Jimmy walked straight to a restaurant to eat broiled chicken and drink white wine. Then he smoked a much better cigar than the warden's. He took a train to a small town where he stepped into a local bar and asked the bartender for a key. He unlocked a door of a room above the bar and found everything unchanged. Even the button that he had pulled from the Ben Price's shirt, when that detective had arrested him, was still on the floor. Behind the bed, Jimmy opened a secret place in the wall and pulled out a dusty suitcase. He opened it and looked fondly at the finest set of burglar's tools in the country. It was a complete set of drills, punches, clamps, jimmies, etc. Half an hour later, Jimmy walked downstairs dressed in a well-fitting suit and carrying a newly cleaned suitcase. As he passed through the barroom, Mike the bartender asked, "Got a job, Jimmy?" "Who, me?" answered Jimmy innocently. "I'm just a salesman for a New York biscuit company." The bartender laughed so hard he had to sit down. A week later, a safe was cracked in Richmond, Indiana. Only $800 was taken, and there were no clues. 2 weeks later, another safe was opened in Logansport for $1,500. Then, an old-fashioned bank safe in Jefferson City gave up $5,000. These losses were high enough to interest the detective Ben Price.
That looks like Jim Valentine's work. He's in business again. He's the only one with clamps that can pull out the combination lock so easily. Just like pulling a radish from wet mud. Yes, I want Jimmy Valentine.
Ben knew Jimmy's habits. After each robbery, he got away quickly. He always worked alone. And he liked high-class company. One afternoon, Jimmy Valentine got off a train in a small town in Arkansas. He looked like a college athlete returning home with his suitcase. As he walked toward the hotel, a very pretty young lady passed him. she walked into the Elmore Bank. Jimmy looked in her eyes, and suddenly he became another man. There weren't any young men as stylish as Jimmy in Elmore, and the girl had blushed when she saw him. Jimmy learned the young lady's name was Annabelle Adams, and her father owned the bank. Jimmy registered at the hotel as Ralph D. Spencer. He said he came to Elmore to go into business. He asked if there was any opening in the shoe business. The hotel clerk was very impressed with Jimmy's smart clothes and manners. He told him there was no shoe store in town, and he hoped Mr. Spencer would stay. The town was pleasant, and the people friendly. This was just the information Jimmy wanted. Mr. Spencer said he would stay in town for a few days, and he could carry his own suitcase upstairs. Thank you. Mr. Ralph Spencer arose from Jimmy Valentine's ashes caused by the fire of love. He stayed in Elmore and started a shoe store. He made many friends, and he met Miss Annabelle Adams. He was completely captured by her charms. At the end of a year, Mr. Ralph Spencer had won the respect of the community. His shoe store was a success, and he was engaged to be married to Annabelle in 2 weeks. Annabelle loved him almost as much as he loved her, and she was proud of him. Annabelle's country banker father approved of Spencer, and he was already treated as a member of the family. One day, Jimmy sat in his room and wrote the following letter, which he mailed to an old friend in St. Louis. Dear old pal, please meet me at Sullivan's Bar in Little Rock next Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. I want to give you my kit of tools. I know you'll be glad to have them. You couldn't find another for $1,000. Billy, I've quit the old business a year ago. I've got a nice store. I'm making an honest living. And I'm to marry the finest girl in the world in 2 weeks. The straight life is best, Billy. I wouldn't touch $1 of another man's money now for $1 million. After I'm married, I'm going to take my wife west, where no one will remember me. I tell you, Billy, she's an angel. She believes in me. I wouldn't do anything crooked for the whole world. Be sure to be at Sullivan's. I must see you. I'll bring along the tools with me. Your old friend, Jimmy. On the Monday night after Jimmy wrote this letter, Ben Price, the detective, drove into town. He lounged around town in a quiet way and found out what he wanted to know. From the drugstore across the street from Spencer's shoe store, he could see Ralph D. Spencer. Going to marry the banker's daughter, are you, Jimmy? Said Ben to himself. Well, I don't know about that. The next morning, Jimmy had breakfast with Annabelle's family. He was going to Little Rock that day to order his wedding suit and to buy something nice for Annabelle. It had been more than a year since his last job, so he thought it would be safe to leave town. After breakfast, the whole family, Mr. Adams, Annabelle, Jimmy, Annabelle's married sister, and her 2 little girls, aged 5 and 9, went downtown together. First, they stopped at Jimmy's hotel, and he ran to his room to get his suitcase. Then, they all went to the bank. Dolph Gibson was out front waiting to drive Jimmy to the railroad station. They all went inside the old-fashioned banking room, behind the railing. Mr. Adams' future son-in-law was welcome anywhere. The bank clerks were pleased to be greeted by such a good-looking, friendly young man who was going to marry Miss Annabelle. Jimmy set his suitcase down, and Annabelle, whose heart was bubbling with fun and joy, put on Jimmy's hat and picked up the suitcase.
Wouldn't I make a nice salesman?
She laughed.
My, it's heavy.
Is it full of gold bricks, Ralph? No, just a lot of shoe accessories I'm going to return, said Jimmy coolly. I'm saving money by carrying them back myself. The Elmore Bank had just put in a new safe and vault. Mr. Adams was very proud of it and insisted on showing it to everyone. The vault was small, but it had 3 solid steel bolts and a time lock. Mr. Adams was proudly explaining how it worked to Mr. Spencer, who was polite but showed no particular interest. While this was going on, Ben Price walked casually into the bank and leaned on his elbow, watching the group inside the railing. He told the bank teller he was just waiting for a friend. Suddenly, there were several screams from the women. When the adults were talking, May, the 9-year-old, had playfully shut her sister Agatha in the vault. Then, she had turned the knob of the combination lock, just as she had seen Mr. Adams do. The old banker grabbed the handle and pulled.
"The door can't be opened,"
he groaned.
"The combination hasn't been set."
Agatha's mother screamed again hysterically. "Hush," said Mr. Adams, raising his trembling hand. "Everybody be quiet for a moment."
"Agatha!"
he shouted as loudly as he could.
"Listen to me."
But they can hardly hear the child's wildly terrified shrieking in the dark vault.
"My precious child!"
screamed the mother.
"She will die of fright! Open the door! Oh, break it open! Can't you men do something?" "My God, Spencer! What shall we do?"
said Mr. Adams in a shaky voice.
"There isn't enough air for her to live long."
Agatha's mother was beating on the door of the vault with her hands. Someone foolishly suggested dynamite. Annabelle turned to Jimmy, her large eyes full of fear, but hopeful that her hero could find the answer.
Can't you do something, Ralph? Try, won't you?
He looked at her with a queer, soft smile on his lips and in his keen eyes. "Annabelle," he said, "give me that rose you are wearing, will you?" She didn't understand, but she unpinned the rose from her dress and put it in his hand. Jimmy stuffed it into his vest pocket. Then, he threw off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves. At that moment, Ralph D. Spencer disappeared and Jimmy Valentine returned. He set his suitcase on the table and opened it flat. He laid out the shining, queer tools neatly. He whistled softly to himself as he always did when at work on a job. The others watched in deep silence without moving, as if they were hypnotized. In a minute, Jimmy's favorite drill was biting smoothly into the steel door. In 10 minutes, his fastest time ever, he threw back the bolts and opened the door. Agatha, safe at last, fell sobbing into her mother's arms. Jimmy Valentine put on his coat and walked toward the front door. A faraway voice he once knew and loved called,
Ralph!
but he didn't stop. A big man stood waiting at the door. "Hello, Ben," said Jimmy. He was still smiling strangely. "Found me at last, have you? Well, let's go. It doesn't make any difference now, anyway." Then, Ben Price acted strangely. "I guess you're mistaken, Mr. Spencer," he said. "I don't believe I recognize you. That's your carriage waiting for you, ain't it?" And Ben Price strolled away down the street. The Romance of a Busy Broker. Mr. Pitcher, a clerk in the office of Harvey Maxwell, broker, was not easily surprised. However, one morning at 9:30 when his boss walked quickly into the office, Pitcher's eyes opened just a little wider. The young lady, who had been Maxwell's stenographer for a year, entered the office together with him. "Good morning, Pitcher," Maxwell called as he dashed to his own desk. He then dived into the great pile of letters and telegrams waiting for him there. The young lady was beautiful. She didn't look like the usual office workers who all wore their hair in high pompadours. Hers was soft and silky. She wore no chains, bracelets, or pendants, and her dress was gray and plain. It quietly fitted her lovely figure perfectly. In her neat black hat was a gold-green feather. On this morning, she was softly and shyly smiling. Her eyes were dreamily bright, her cheeks peach pink, and her expression a happy one, touched with memory. Mr. Pitcher, still a little curious, noticed that her actions were different too. Usually, she went straight to her desk in the next room. Today, she stayed in the big office. She even moved to Maxwell's desk, near enough for him to notice her. But now, Maxwell was no longer a man. He was a machine. He was a busy New York broker, moved by springs and wheels. When Maxwell saw the stenographer standing by his desk, he said sharply, "Well, what is it?" His crowded desk was piled high with opened mail. His gray eyes flashed at her impatiently. "Nothing," answered the stenographer. She walked away with a little smile. "Mr. Pitcher," she said to the clerk, "did Mr. Maxwell say anything yesterday about finding a new stenographer?" "Yes, he did," answered Pitcher. "I called the employment agency yesterday afternoon and asked them to send over a few samples. Not a single young lady has come here yet this morning. Nobody in a big hat or chewing gum." "All right," said the young lady. "I will still work until someone comes to take my place." She hung up her black hat with its gold-green feather and went to her desk at once. The broker's hour is crowded, but so are his minutes and seconds, and this day was Harvey Maxwell's busiest day. The ticker tape machine kept spilling tape on the floor in big curls. The desk telephone never stopped ringing. Men filled the office, calling to Maxwell cheerfully, sharply, angrily, and excitedly. Boys ran in and out with messages and telegrams. The clerks in the office were kept jumping from here to there. Throughout the world, there were typhoons, landslides, snowstorms, floods, and volcanic eruptions. All of these things influenced the broker's office. Maxwell pushed his chair away. He jumped from ticker tape to phone and from desk to door like a trained dancer. In the midst of his great stress, the broker suddenly saw a fringe of yellow hair in a high pompadour by his desk. On top of it was a huge velvet hat with long ostrich feathers. Below all of this was an imitation fur coat and a long necklace with beads as large as hickory nuts. It reached nearly to the floor, and there was a big silver heart swinging back and forth on the end of it. A young lady was connected to all these accessories. "This lady is from the stenographer's agency to see about the job," said Pitcher. Maxwell turned halfway around with his hands full of papers and ticker tape. "What job?" he asked with a frown. "The job of stenographer," said Pitcher. "You told me yesterday to call up and ask them to send one over this morning."
"Are you going crazy, Pitcher?" asked Maxwell. "Why should I ask you such a ridiculous thing? Miss Leslie has been a perfect stenographer for the past year. It's her job for as long as she wants it. Cancel that order with the agency, Pitcher, and don't bring any more women in here." Then, turning to the colorful creature before him, he said, "I'm sorry, madam, but there's no job open here." The pompadour and the beads left the office angrily. The silver heart was swinging and banging against the office furniture all the way out. Pitcher remarked to the bookkeeper, "The boss seems to get more forgetful every day." Now things got even busier and faster. Stocks were being bought and sold at full speed. Maxwell worked like a machine, making decisions on stocks, bonds, and loans. In this world of money, there was no room for the human world or the world of nature. When lunchtime finally came near, there was a little lull in the noise and confusion. Maxwell stood by his desk with his hands full of telegrams and notes. He had a fountain pen over his right ear, and his hair was hanging over his forehead. His window was open because it was spring, and the air was soft and warm. Through the window came the delicate, sweet odor of lilacs. When this lovely aroma reached the broker, he suddenly stood still. This fragrance belonged to Miss Leslie. It was hers and hers alone. The aroma brought her picture clearly to his mind. The world of money disappeared. She was in the next room, just 20 steps away. "By George, I'll do it now," said Maxwell half aloud. "Yes, I'll ask her now. I wonder why I didn't do it long ago." He dashed into the little office as fast as if he were a baseball shortstop chasing a ball. He rushed up to the desk of the stenographer. She looked up at him with a smile. A soft pink color spread over her cheeks, and her eyes were sweet and kind. Maxwell leaned one elbow on her desk. He was still holding papers in both hands, and the pen was still above his ear. "Miss Leslie," he began in a hurry, "I am only free for a moment, but in that moment I want to say something to you. Will you be my wife? I haven't time to make love to you in the usual way, but I really do love you. Answer quickly, please. I have a lot of work to do."
"Oh, what are you talking about?"
exclaimed the young lady. She stood up and looked at him with wide, round eyes. "Don't you understand?" said Maxwell frantically. "I want to marry you. I love you, Miss Leslie. I wanted to tell you so I took a minute when things were a little slow. They're calling me on the phone right now. Tell them to wait a minute, Pitcher. Won't you please marry me, Miss Leslie? The stenographer acted very strangely. At first, she seemed too shocked to speak. Then, tears flowed from her shining eyes. Finally, she smiled brightly through the tears, and she tenderly slid one arm around the broker's neck.
"Oh, now I think I understand,"
she said softly.
"It's this old brokerage business that has pushed everything else out of your head for a while. I was really frightened at first. Don't you remember, Harvey? We were married last evening at 8 o'clock in the little church around the corner."
$1,000. $1,000, said the lawyer, and he handed Gillian a thin package of $50 notes. Gillian laughed as he took the money. Too bad it's not $10,000, he joked. A person could really have fun then. $1,000 is a bother. Without smiling, the lawyer continued, Your uncle's will requires you to tell us exactly how you'll spend the money. I hope you will do so. Don't worry, grinned Gillian. But I might have to hire a secretary. I'm no good at accounts. Still laughing, he went to his club. Old Bryson, who was calm and 40, sat in a corner reading. He sighed and put his book aside when he saw Gillian come in. Hi, old Bryson. Wake up, said Gillian. I have a funny story to tell you. I hate your stories, said old Bryson gloomily. Oh, but this is a good one. My uncle left me $1,000. I want you to tell me what a man can possibly do with $1,000. I thought, said old Bryson unenthusiastically, that your uncle was worth millions. That's the joke, said Gillian. He left the whole pile of money to a hospital. His two maids each got $10, and his nephew, me, got $1,000. You always had plenty of money to throw away, observed old Bryson. Oh, yes, Uncle was a fairy godmother with my allowance. Any other heirs? Asked old Bryson. There is a Miss Hayden, the daughter of one of Uncle's friends. She's a quiet young thing, musical. And she lived in Uncle's house. Another joke. She also received only $10. Come on, old fellow. Tell me how to get rid of $1,000 quickly. Well, you could buy milk for 100 babies during the summer and perhaps save 50 lives. You could spend a half an hour gambling. You could educate an ambitious boy, or you could buy a famous painting. Maybe you'd rather rent a stadium for one night and give a lecture to anybody who might come. I could almost like you, old Bryson, if you'd be serious. I asked you what I could do with $1,000. You? said Bryson with a little laugh. There's only one logical thing for you to do. Buy Lotta Laurier, the actress, a diamond pendant. Then take yourself to Idaho and become a sheep farmer. I hate sheep. Now please go away and let me read. And he picked up his book again. Good idea, thought Gillian. If I spend the money all at once, it will be easier to account for. Miss Laurier was in her dressing room, powdering her nose. When Gillian entered, she asked impatiently, What is it, Gillian? I'm in a hurry. I'm going on in 2 minutes. This will only take 2 minutes, he said. I wondered how you'd like a pendant. I can pay 3 zeros with a figure 1 in front.
If you like,
yawned Miss Laurier.
Hand me my gloves, will you? Did you see Della's necklace the other night? It cost $2,200 at Tiffany's. But of course...
And she hurried off. Gillian strolled out to his waiting taxi. What would you do with $1,000? He asked the driver. Open a pub, the cabbie replied. I could make plenty of money. You want to lend me the money? Oh, no, said Gillian. I was just curious. Drive around until I tell you to stop. 8 blocks down Broadway, Gillian got out and talked to a blind man who was selling pencils. Excuse me, he asked, but please tell me what you do with $1,000.
I just heard you get out of a cab, didn't I? I guess you're all right. Take a look at this.
And he pulled a small bank book from his pocket. His deposit balance was $1,785. Gillian returned the book and got into the cab. He gave the driver his late uncle's address. Miss Hayden was writing letters in the library. She was small and slender and dressed in black. Her eyes were beautiful. Gillian drifted in and said, I've just come from the lawyer. He found a postscript in Uncle's will. It seems he willed you $1,000. I was driving this way, so Mr. Tolman asked me to bring the money to you. Here it is. Gillian laid the money on the desk near her hand. Miss Hayden turned pale. Oh, she said. Oh! Gillian looked out the window and said, I suppose you know I love you. I'm sorry, she said. With a smile, Gillian sat down at the desk and wrote an account of spending his $1,000 in these words. Paid by Robert Gillian, $1,000 to the best and dearest woman on earth. He put it in an envelope, bowed, and left. At the law office, he announced cheerily, Well, I have spent the $1,000. It feels like summer today. Don't you think so, Mr. Tolman? The lawyer peered coldly at him through his gold glasses. Gillian threw the envelope on the table. Mr. Tolman called his partner Sharp, and together they opened the big safe. From inside, they brought out a large sealed envelope and opened it. After reading the contents, the lawyer looked at Gillian strangely and said, Your uncle instructed us to open this only after you had given an account of your $1,000. We do not approve of you, sir, but we will follow instructions. Your uncle says here that if you used the money wisely and unselfishly, we are to hand over you bonds worth $50,000. If, however, you used the money in your usual way, carousing and drinking with your no-good friends, then the $50,000 is to be paid to Miss Miriam Hayden at once. Now, we will examine your account of the $1,000. Mr. Tolman reached for the envelope, but Gillian was quicker. He grabbed it and tore it into tiny pieces. It's all right, he said, smiling. There's no need to bother you with this. Actually, I lost all the money by betting on the races. Good day, gentlemen. Gillian strolled cheerfully out of the office. Tolman and Sharp looked at each other and shook their heads in disbelief. Out in the hall, they could hear Gillian whistling gaily as he waited for the elevator.